Hello, comrades. Today we're talking about the best kind of pun. And now I know some people think that any pun is a bad pun, or some people just really love puns and will accept even terrible puns, and both of these people are wrong, and it's simply not a position we're going to respect today. There are good puns and there are bad puns, and the best kind of pun is actually a rhetorical device called solipsis. Now, before we get into the weeds on this, the problem with the rhetorical devices is that they all kind of come from Greek and, the ancient Greek culture and thought, and certain constructions, grammatical constructions, language constructions, may work one way in Greek and another way. They may work differently in English, or sometimes not at all. Because of this, solipsis and some other rhetorical devices have kind of an existential problem, and solipsis has been caught up with two other rhetorical devices, zeugma and ellipsis. Now, it might sound like a lot, but we're going to get into it. It's not that complicated. Zeugma is often broadly defined in English as when a word, normally a verb, is left unrepeated in another part of the sentence, even sometimes in the next sentence or the previous sentence, and it's understood through context. We don't have to always repeat the verb. A simple example would be, the man eats salad, the woman pasta. Zeugma is a kind of ellipsis. So ellipsis is where a word is omitted. So we can see eats was omitted. I could have said, the man eats salad, the woman eats pasta, made it just two separate sentences completely. But if I kind of join them together, maybe with like a semicolon, I just say, the man eats salad, the woman pasta, it might sound better. If I have that kind of construction, it might sound better in certain contexts. Now, obviously, we don't want to overuse this all the time. This was super popular in Greek for a variety of reasons. It's not as popular in English, but there are still certainly times where this kind of ellipsis, this kind of omission, zeugma, can be useful. But things get even more interesting with solipsis. Now, there are multiple kinds of solipsis, and the first kind of solipsis is grammatical solipsis, which actually was what was considered zeugma in ancient Greek. So if it wasn't grammatical solipsis in ancient Greek, it simply wasn't zeugma, and it was just ellipsis, or maybe another rhetorical device in combination with ellipsis. So grammatical solipsis is when we have zeugma, that is, we don't repeat a verb, but the verb form doesn't make sense with both parts of the sentence. Now, because of how English works, this is not really common, and it often sounds rather clunky in English. But we can say it in some sentences like, neither they nor I am wrong. That doesn't sound like super terrible to me, but if you really pay attention and you look, neither they nor I am wrong, am is correctly referring to I, to me, but it's incorrectly referring to they or them. So, it might be technically more grammatically correct to really spell the whole thing out and say neither they are wrong nor am I, or something like that. And this was super useful for Greek and Latin, where this kind of thing could come up all the time. However, in English, it's not super common, but it is very interesting whenever you do stumble upon an instance of grammatical solipsis, or zeugma in English. And it is important to note that this kind of solipsis does require zeugma, as it is often more broadly defined in English, as the kind of the not repeating of the verb. The next kind of solipsis we have, and this is where things get really fun, is semantic solipsis. This is when everything works grammatically, but the verb is understood, or maybe another word, is understood with two different meanings. One in the original context, and another in the other context where it's being replaced. So one of my favorite examples of this comes from the song by Warren Zevon, Mr. Bad Example, where the singer is just kind of narrating a whole list of terrible, ethically questionable things he has done throughout his life. And we have the quote, I got a part-time job at my father's carpet store, laying tactless stripping and housewives by the score. So we can see this is essentially a kind of pun. We can say that laying, in the first part, laying tactless stripping, refers to the process of physically putting down carpet, laying in a very literal sense, and laying housewives by the score, the part where laying is not repeated, is, well, let's just say it's a way of saying he had intimate relations with many people who were already married. So you can see it has both meanings in one sentence, even though it's not repeated the second time. And once you see this kind of thing, once you start seeing zeugma and semantic solipsis, it really does become clear that it is very common. We have tons of phrases like make love, not war. He took his hat and his leave. See the world and your potential. The particular example from Mr. Bad example is both solipsis and zeugma because laying is not repeated. But as long as you use the same verb with two different meanings, or any word really, it could be considered solipsis even if it's not zeugma, even if it's repeated and it's not omitted. For example, in Hotel California, we have the line, mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. So we see the word on is repeated with two completely different meanings. The first is on the ceiling, it's physically on the ceiling, and the second is on ice, which is just a way of saying that it had ice cubes within it. So this clearly shows that solipsis can exist without zeugma. You can repeat the word and it will still work, and you can do it with other kinds of words. It doesn't necessarily have to be a verb, it's just easier with a verb, but you can see it worked right here with a preposition. Now, there is another kind of solipsis that is even more pun-like, and in my opinion, not quite as good, but still rather common. And this kind of solipsis actually cannot have a zeugma. It's when a verb is understood more than one way, but only applies to one object, normally in a literal sense and a figurative sense. So I was trying to think of some examples, and one is if there's like a guy with x-ray vision and he's looking at someone and he's catching them and he says, I can see through you. It's both literally and not literally true, and we can understand it both ways. And there's another famous example, which is a shipping company. Their slogan was "We go a long way for you," where it's both meant we go a long way, as in we do a lot, but also literally we go a great distance. And so I think having words to describe these kinds of things are very useful because once you know the words for them, once you know they exist, you can start seeing patterns you might have already been kind of aware of, but just a lot more consciously, and you really do start to see these things everywhere. And if you so choose, you can really start to incorporate them into your own writing and think more about what makes good rhetoric, what makes something sound good. And I think a lot of these phrases do sound good. Maybe the x-ray I can see through you is a little cheesy, but I really like, the one about laying tactless stripping and housewives, or we go a long way through for you, it sounds a little cheesy, but it is the kind of thing you hear a lot. It is something that works as a marketing slogan and can really be helpful in a lot of different contexts. There are some other kinds of zeugma and solipsis. So just to do some overview, solipsis is when one word has multiple meanings, and sometimes it's omitted and sometimes it's not. And zeugma is generally understood very broadly to be when you don't have to repeat the word, when you just omit it because you've already said it and it's already understood through context. And there are other kind of subdivisions based off of when the omitted part is, but it's really not that common in English. So if you do go into Greek or Latin, this will be super helpful, but in English we really don't need to go through the subcategories. But I've found this, even in English, to be very helpful, just to have the broad framework to work with. And if you feel like, you learned something valuable in this video, drop me a like. But remember, good night, good day, good potato. I think I need a new potato.